I've seen a few videos on YouTube lately that have the beginning. It's a phrase that goes like, "This is one of the most difficult videos I've ever had to make," you know. And coming from someone who has 1,000 videos up on YouTube, um, I I need to say the same thing. This is tragic. One of my friends, Kyle, he's in a burn unit in Denver right now, and the circumstances that led up to it are something that a lot of people could have seen coming. And I want to tell you the whole story here. In the first week of October, I got interested in the local Occupy movement. Mostly like, ooh, there's something pretty, let me point my camera at it, and after a while, some of the things that they said made sense. You know, we agreed on a lot of what the problems in the country are. And I want to stress here that agreeing on what the problems are does not mean that you agree with the solution that's being presented to you or the tactics that people are going to employ when they're dealing with the problem. For most of October and November, I spent most of my days going down to the Occupy movement and filming things and putting these videos up on YouTube. And one of the people that I met there, his name was Kyle Lawrence. He was there before me. He was more aware of this activism community and the things that are going on around the world. And for the first few days that I was down there, I really felt like the people who had been there for a week or two before me were way tighter knit, like they knew each other. And it was only after a couple months that I realized that pretty much everyone who comes there feels the same way, like everybody else knows each other and I'm an outsider. But as the weeks went on, I started to do more in-depth filming of them. They got to know me. They saw my videos on YouTube and liked them. So whenever I would want to interview them for any reason, ask them a question on camera, they were happy to oblige me. And in that early phase of the Occupy movement in my city, I got closer to a few of the main protesters there, the ones that were down there all the time. It's a leaderless movement, but just by virtue of being more involved, they were looked up to. And one of those was Kyle. Young as he was, he's 22 years old right now. He was looked up to by a lot of the people coming out there because he was so involved. And on one trip in particular, when I was taking some supplies to the Occupy Denver camp, Kyle rode along with me, and we talked for hours. We toured the Occupy Denver camp together. We had one of those camera fights where you catch each other holding your camera. And for the next couple of weeks, I was closer to Kyle and some of the others at the Occupy movement than others. And throughout December and January when I was down there, Kyle had disappeared. I didn't see him anymore. And at the time, I figured that it was probably because he had stuff going on in his life and he didn't like the drama because there was a lot of infighting within the Occupy movement. And most of that infighting was about what individual causes they were going to protest, whether or not they were going to work with the city to get a permit, whether or not they were going to work with government at all to try to effect some change that way. And all of this infighting was driving a lot of people away, and I figured that was the reason why he left. Why he wasn't hanging around. A lot of people disagreed with what was then the majority of the protesters, and they would start to do things on their own, like set up tents outside the permitted area so that they would get arrested. They were doing things that were intrinsically illegal, and I thought, that's a fundamental difference of opinion in how to go about things. Do you want your actions to be legal and work within the system, or do you want to go completely against the system, tear it down, and be illegal? And this was something that I, wrestled with in my head. What's the best way to go about things? We've got this large group of people, and we all need to propose some solutions that everyone can agree on and work on together, or at least a majority of them will work on together. And it just seemed like those of us who decided to end up being, of the mindset of work with government, work to change the system that we have rather than go completely illegal and try to tear it down. Those of us who made that decision we were worn down by the protesters that wouldn't have anything of it. It didn't matter if we could convince a majority of people to not do illegal things. There were people who would split off and say that's bullshit. They're being co-opted. They're working with the man when they should never even they should never even acknowledge that the man has any authority. He only has authority when we give it to him. And so, when I left the Occupy movement, I made a video here on YouTube, and I said my reasons why. And since then, I started a voter registration drive, and I became a delegate for a political party in a caucus so that I could help affect change. And many other former occupiers in my city are now delegates. I don't want to name them, but I can tell you that people made that decision. They made the decision to, to work with the system and to work within the limits of the law and still affect change. And those protesters that are left largely are not of that mindset anymore. They are there because they feel like we tried that and it didn't work. And I disagree. I didn't try that. And now I'm trying that. What I didn't know about what happened to Kyle was that the group of protesters that decided to go be more politically active and try to affect change, they weren't the first protesters to leave and start doing their own thing. Some of them actually left because they wanted to be more illegal. And they wanted to do things that, the majority of people down there would not agree with. But they had their own clique of people that had a certain mindset, and they were largely militaristic about it. And that is basically what's left of the protesters now. But there was a certain segment that left that Kyle got swept up into. And I went months without seeing Kyle. And then last week I went to a restaurant called Huhot, Huhot, and it's a Mongolian grill, and I was waiting to have my food cooked for me, and working at the grill was Kyle. And I said, "Hi Kyle, how you doing?" And he was happy to see me, but he said that he couldn't talk about things outside of work because he had gotten in trouble for that before. So I told him, "Well, I'll call you later, and we'll get together." And then later on that night, I went to a couple of other mutual friends' houses, and we called Kyle but didn't get an answer. He might have been working late. But that was the last time I saw him before he got arrested. Then last week, in Green Mountain Falls, the town hall building was burned to the ground. And the next day I didn't hear much news about all that. But then on Saturday, I was woken up by one of the occupiers that I knew very well, and I was told that one of the people who was involved in that arson most definitely was an occupier, and it would make everyone else look bad. So I looked into it, and I couldn't find out the names in the news reports that first came out. But after the arson, there was an investigation, and then police had a standoff at a house, and two people came out of the house, but a third was left in the house. And they were able to resolve everything peacefully, and the third came out later. But now I know why that third person would not come out of the building. And it's because during the arson, something went wrong, and two people got horribly burned. And I just read a news report from today that says that they went in there to destroy computers and records. They broke into the town hall meeting, or the town hall after hours. They went in through a window, and then they wanted to destroy records. And this news report says that they later decided to torch the place with gasoline. And they poured gallons of gasoline around the building, and before they could light it in a way where they could be safely away from it, the fumes ignited on their own, and they were still inside. And they got horribly burned, so it was very easy for the investigators to track down who it was. And my friend Kyle is now in a burn ward in Denver in a hospital, and police have charged somebody else involved with this who was also burned. They've already charged him with arson, burglary, and conspiracy. All felonies. And Kyle is going to be charged when he gets out of the burn unit. And now a 22-year-old young man who had a very bright future is now horribly burned and will probably be in a prison somewhere for the majority of his young life, because there was a group of people who decided that the things they wanted to do to try to change the world would be illegal instead of trying to work with the system. And they had dreams of, doing black blocs, doing covert operations, I guess, like this. They had dreams of Highland preparedness and visions that the world was going to end soon. That there would be some sort of revolution like they had in the Middle East, and it hasn't come yet, and they're getting frustrated with that, so they've become even more proactive to try to get something like that to happen, and it's not working. And all it's done right now is ruin a young man's life.